It turns out that the first person to conceive of building a canal between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans was the Spanish King Charles V in the 1530s. Charles V was the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain, as Carlos I. He is often called one of the last great universal emperors, a powerful symbol of the unity of Spain, the Catholic Church, and the Christian world in his time. Incidentally, here's an interesting fact. This once most powerful man in the world, ruler of a vast empire, heir to 4 dynasties, King of Spain and Holy Roman Emperor, in 1556 voluntarily relinquished power, abdicated all his titles, and spent the rest of his life in seclusion. So, this king ordered a survey of the isthmus, and in 1529, explorers even drew up a working plan for a canal. But due to endless wars raging in Europe at the time, the project was abandoned and largely forgotten. It was only revived 350 years later, not in Spain, but in France. Inspired by the successful 10-year construction of the Suez Canal, La Société Internationale du Canal Interoceanique secured the rights in 1878 to build a similar canal in Panama. Viscount Ferdinand Marie de Lesseps headed up the construction. He wasn't an engineer, wasn't a builder. He was a French diplomat, and he dealt with issues using his diplomatic clout. The successful construction and opening of the Suez Canal brought him fame. Lesseps became a member of numerous scientific societies. They erected a monument to him in Port Said, and it was Lesseps who represented France at the ceremony, transferring and unveiling the Statue of Liberty to the Americans. His reputation helped raise money for the Panama Canal. Construction began in 1881. Lesseps insisted on digging a sea-level canal. He was convinced this project would be easier to pull off than cutting through the sands of Suez. That's exactly what the money and other resources were raised for. They recruited workers from all over the West Indies, 40,000 people. At its narrowest point, the isthmus was only about 40 miles wide, but the terrain there was solid, rocky, and mountainous in places. The proposed canal route crossed major rivers that needed to be diverted, and most importantly, tropical diseases posed an enormous threat to workers' health. Workers and engineers were dying from malaria, yellow fever, and dysentery, while construction was hampered by frequent floods and landslides. It's awful to say, but around 22,000 workers died. The project fell years behind schedule, and its budget was exceeded by hundreds of millions. Nevertheless, de Lesseps wouldn't back down from his plan until the project turned into a complete disaster. By the time it became obvious to everyone that building a sea-level canal was impossible, and that the only viable option was constructing locks leading to an elevated canal, the company went bankrupt and ceased to exist, wiping out 800,000 investors. Lesseps turned to Alexandre Gustave Eiffel for help in fabricating metal locks. Eiffel was on the brink of disaster at that moment. Money for continuing construction of the Paris Tower was desperately short. He was facing a global scandal and bankruptcy. He gladly took on designing the locks, but demanded a very substantial sum. Yes, the Eiffel Tower was partially built with money from the Panama Canal. Eiffel was saved, and de Lesseps was ruined. Construction stopped. In 1893, both were convicted of fraud and abuse of power. 2 years after the trial, de Lesseps died. In France, the word Panama became synonymous with major fraud and scams. And then, on the initiative of President Theodore Roosevelt, in 1902, the United States acquired the French assets in the canal zone for $40 million. The only problem was that Colombia, which owned that territory, was against it. The U.S. had to use its military influence to support Panama's independence movement, and ultimately, the deal was struck with the new government. The very first thing American leaders did was launch an aggressive campaign to eliminate mosquitoes. This significantly reduced illness and increased productivity. The builders owe that to sanitary physician William Gorgas. Work began with changes to the design. Massive locks were built at the Atlantic and Pacific ends of the canal. These 110-foot wide locks allowed ships to pass through a series of chambers with adjustable water levels, raising ships up to Gatun Lake in the canal, which is situated 85 feet, 26 meters above sea level. The most ambitious project was the Culebra Cut, an 8-mile-long trench dug through the Continental Divide at 210 feet, 64 meters above sea level. It took 27,000 tons of dynamite to blast through this challenge. By the time the work was completed in 1913, the original elevation of the terrain had been reduced from 210 feet, 64 meters, to 40 feet, 12 meters above sea level. On December 10, 1913, a navigable waterway between the two oceans was finally established. On January 7, 1914, the French crane vessel Alexandre Lavalette made the first official passage through the canal. Today, 4% of all global trade passes through the canal, which translates to approximately 15,000 ships annually. The transition to local oversight began in 1977 when U.S. President Jimmy Carter and Panamanian leader Omar Torrijos signed a treaty. On December 31, 1999, the Panama Canal Authority assumed full control. In 1994, the American Society of Civil Engineers named the Panama Canal one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. In September 2010, the 1 millionth vessel passed through the canal,